In 1936, Spanish poet Federico García Lorca was murdered by a firing squad under Franco, the fascist dictator of Spain. His body disappeared into soil. His voice did not. A few years earlier, Lorca stood before a hall in Argentina and spoke of a force that pulses through all true art. A wild and dangerous spirit, alive in the blood of poetry, music and dance. Its name? Duende. In this video, we'll step into Lorca's world, his life, the surreal darkness of his poetry, and Duende, the creative force that underpins all dark art, and how you can summon this Duende in your own creative practice. But before we begin, let us call Lorca's voice back from the dark. Here's a short passage from his elegy, Lament for Ignacio Sanchez Mejias. This is from part 2, The Spilled Blood. If you'd like, close your eyes for a moment as you listen, and let your imagination begin to tango with Duende. This is translated by Stephen Spender and J.L. Gilly. But now he sleeps without end. Now the moss and the grass open with sure fingers the flower of his skull. And now his blood comes out singing along marshes and meadows, sliding on frozen horns, faltering soulless in the mist, stumbling over 1,000 hooves like a long, dark, sad tongue to form a pool of agony. That poem has the raw, irrational force of Duende, born from blood and shadow, from the threshold where life and death wrestle. If you're new here, hi, I'm Nathan Hassel, and this is The Poetry Vessel. If you end up liking what you see, like, subscribe and comment, and if you want more updates from The Poetry Vessel, join our mailing list. It's in the description box below. Anyway, back to the video. Part 1. Who is Lorca? Federico García Lorca, 1898 to 1936, was a Spanish playwright, poet and theatre director from the autonomous Andalusian region of Spain. He was part of the Generation of 27 literature circle, which introduced various European movements like Futurism, Surrealism and Symbolism into Spanish literature. Lorca was murdered by a national firing squad on August 19, 1936, in the early months of the Spanish Civil War, likely due to his socialist leanings and his homosexuality. These motives are, however, disputed by scholars. 3 years before his murder, in 1933, Lorca travelled to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where he gave his famous lecture, The Play and Theory of Duende, where he discussed the role of artistic inspiration, insisting that the best art required a lucid understanding of death, connection to the nation of a people, and that we need to put down the shield of reason to allow for the irrational to wrestle hold of the artist. Part 2. What is Duende? Duende is difficult to define, which is part of the point Lorca makes. The word itself comes from a folkloric goblin, and for Lorca, his Duende is a force so primal it's almost impossible to contain. He stated that it never emerges in the same way twice, like a Heraclitean river you can never step into twice. One of the famous stories about Duende comes from the Romani flamenco singer named Manuel Torre. After listening to a young, hopeful sing, Torre was impressed with his skill, but ultimately unconvinced by his passion. He said, "You have a voice, you understand style, but you'll never succeed because you have no duende." He also said, "All that has dark sounds has duende." In response, Lorca added his own commentary, "And there's no deeper truth than that." Part 3. What are these dark sounds? How do these dark sounds come out in film, art, music, or poetry? Let's use a poet as an example. Like the singer we just described, a poet may be technically proficient and may be able to use words in clever, rhythmic, and interesting ways. Perhaps this poet utilizes these skills to write lighter verse, something playful and somewhat pleasurable, but not necessarily enduring. They may understand iambic pentameter, can write in meter and rhyme schemes, and know the difference between a sonnet, pantoum, free verse, and blank verse. However, without duende, this dark sound, this energetic force, the poet would not have found themselves in the depths of the dark where the good art emerges. Lorca calls these dark sounds the mystery, the roots that cling to the mire that we all know, that we all ignore, but from which comes the very substance of art. Lorca believed, after attending over 1,000 philosophy talks, that duende is the mysterious force that everyone feels and no philosopher has explained. Instead, he argues it is up to the artist, the poet, the dancer, to transmit this libidinous energy that duende has. Maybe a philosopher can't explain duende because it isn't something to be explained, but rather creatively expressed and experienced. Duende cannot be reasoned with, it can only be wrestled with. The poet's instinct allows this force to filter through them, using their language, their rhythm, their form as an embodiment of it. This is maybe why duende is said to have a dark sound, and why it is like music. Music itself cannot be fully explained. It is what it is, music. A collection of integrated sounds and tactility that moves the very cells of the listener. The dark sounds of duende can manifest in many ways. The raw, unbridled emotion in a flamenco singer's cante jondo, the mournful wail of a blues guitar, the dissonant chords and guttural vocals in black metal, the hushed secrets in a confessional, the intensity of a grief-struck poet. Are these the sounds of the human experience at its most primal and profound? Think of the opening lines of Sylvia Plath's poem, Daddy. You do not do any more, black shoe. Even in those few words, we can hear the chilling undercurrent of rage and despair that characterizes so much of Plath's work. A glimpse into the raw emotion that fuels her duende, in this case, that black shoe. Part 4. How to recognize duende. Lorca argues that anywhere in Andalusia, people constantly talk about the duende and recognize it wherever it appears with a fine instinct. The fine instinct converses with humanity's irrational side, which awakens this energetic force within us. In that sense, duende is a transmission, akin to a dissonant flute that enchants a dreamer awake. As someone who lives in the US and is from England, I ask, do our cultures recognize duende? I suspect not. It is duende that comes from a realm other than the ordinary realm of the day-to-day consciousness, the other, dark, numinous force that appears from the edges of the psyche and bleeds in with the weirdness of a dream to a mind that's awake. Duende must be either pre-rational or irrational. It comes from the realm of the spirit, the Platonic realm of the forms. It is tribal, ancestral, ritually awakened, instinctive, and pre-civil. When it shows its moon-dark face in the modern world, we look away from it. In Psychology and Religion, Carl Jung says, "Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." There's a crossover here, that we have a shadow where our repressed qualities, good or bad, live. Like Jung, who believes that we must wrestle with all the parts of ourselves and pull them into unity, Lorca says that Duende is a force, not a labour, a struggle, not a thought. Duende as a force and a struggle, where Jung might say the force is in the shadow and that's where the struggle lies, and that's perhaps where the gold lives inside the cave. Lorca also speaks of an old maestro of the guitar when he discusses where Duende comes from. He states, "The Duende is not in the throat. The Duende surges up, inside, from the soles of the feet." So if all that has dark sounds has Duende, where is the dark sound? How does a poet listen for its hidden inner music? Duende can be awakened in many ways, through meditation, by spending time with the darker expressions of art, like dark ambient or black metal music, Ted Hughes's apocalyptic mythopoetic visions in The Crow, Hieronymus Bosch's paintings, Dante's Divine Comedy, and many, many more. If there is such a thing as Duende, if you seek the dark, that occultic power, it will not just find you, but swell up inside you and spill open into what it is you're creating. Lorca insists this dark force is not the same as inspiration, not the same as grace. To understand it, we need to see how he set it against two other artistic forces, the angel and the muse. Part 5. The three forces: angel, muse, and duende. Lorca believes that there are three forces that inspire artists of all kinds: the angel, the muse, and duende. He argues that the best artists, musicians, poets, philosophers, and more are the ones who express the duende and experience that over the muse or the angel. He said, "For every man, every artist called Nietzsche or Cézanne, every step that he climbs in the tower of his perfection is at the expense of the struggle that he undergoes with his duende, not with an angel, as is often said, nor with his muse. This is a precise and fundamental distinction at the root of the work." Let's look into each with more detail. The angel. Lorca says, "The angel guides and grants, like Saint Raphael, defends and spares, like Saint Michael, proclaims and forewarns, like Saint Gabriel. The angel dazzles, but flies over a man's head high above, shedding its grace, and the man realizes his work, or his charm, or his dance effortlessly." So the angel is there to help the artist along, to give some inspiration. Though I'd argue that an angel such as the Ophanim, the terrifying biblical angel with its interlocking wheels of eyes, probably has something of the duende in it. The muse. Lorca respects the muse as a force, but doesn't see her as holding the true power between the finite and the infinite. The Muse dictates and occasionally prompts. She can do relatively little, since she's distant and so tired, I've seen her twice, that you'd think her heart half marble. This marble heart looks at every part of you, like Rilke's vision in his poem The Archaic Torso of Apollo, where the speaker hears the instruction, you must change your life. However, Lorca argues that the Muse stirs the intellect, bringing a landscape of columns and an illusory taste of laurel. And intellect is often poetry's enemy, since it limits too much. So much so that the poet forgets that he may be eaten suddenly by ants, or that a huge arsenical lobster might fall on his head. Duende is the force of urgent expression held in the inconsolable hands of death. Ants could suddenly eat the poet. With that knowledge, the realism and finitude in Duende, its force not just beyond the body and spirit, but very much tied in the physical world in all of its creations and destructions. To bring this potential into art is one of the ways we are dialoguing with Duende. It is perhaps the threshold between pre-birth and birth, life and death, and Duende, like death, has a say throughout life, and then the final say, like T.S. Eliot's whimper rather than a bang that concludes the world at the end of his poem The Hollow Men. To Lorca, the Muse is too fanciful or too nice, and is the dictate of the artist rather than the artist fighting. It's a transcription over a tussle. If a poet goes into what Lorca calls aristocratic fineness and is too inoffensive and forgets that they are also meat, as is evident when a mosquito cracks our skin open, the artist is not delving deeply enough into their Duende. They are not fighting. Duende. To connect with this primal force, Lorca argues Duende has to be roused from the furthest habitations of the blood. Why? Because the true struggle is with the Duende. To wrestle the Duende is to wrestle for wisdom. There must be the shock of being pierced by the Duende, like the belly of a bullfighter, locked eyes with the bull. Only wisdom can be known through the spilling between this threshold of life and death. The problem with Duende is that it is only felt as an othered presence. In sleep paralysis, for example, a condition where the sleeper is half awake, in that they are mostly conscious but unable to move their body. In European folklore, it is said that there's an old hag who sits on the chest of the person experiencing this paralysis. That felt presence is a touch of the Duende, the paralyzing fear of total subjection to the other, no physical or spiritual strength, but the channeling, the being watched, the being held, the being frozen. Part 6. How to find the Duende. Lorca argues that, seeking the Duende, there is neither map nor discipline. We only know it burns the blood like powdered glass. And that, although people might try to mimic the Duende, he argues that the great artists of southern Spain, gypsy or flamenco, singers, dancers, musicians, know that emotion is impossible without the arrival of the Duende. He suggests that some individuals may successfully deceive others into believing they can convey the essence of the Duende without truly possessing it. He says, however, but we only have to attend a little, and not be full of indifference to discover the fraud and chase off that clumsy artifice. If we do our job as good listeners or observers of art, we can separate, as they say, the wheat from the chaff, the true duende from its false imitation. In black metal music, for example, some artists' albums and songs contain this unmistakable, mysterious essence that is true to the genre's core. A friend and I frequently refer to it as the mystery, that which pulls and entrances and brings the listener through an experience of duende. Without channeling, the essence of duende will be lost, unremembered, playing tricks on lazy audiences. In this sense, duende is a dark remembering. And as a remembering, it is also, perhaps paradoxically, ever-changing, like the nature of being itself. It emerges and re-emerges in new, individual forms of expression, for it has the essence of the eternal. Lorca says, it's impossible for it ever to repeat itself, and it's important to underscore this. The duende never repeats itself, any more than the waves of the sea do in a storm. Finding duende, therefore, requires active engagement to confront the shadows within ourselves and in the world around us. This might involve listening to a challenging piece of music, or studying a particularly disturbing painting, or reading a poem that has a dark heart that beats its blood for us each time we encounter it. It is through this active engagement and our deliberate involvement with the dark sounds that we can channel and experience that sense of duende. Part 7. The Old Woman Dancing. One of the most striking examples in Lorca's lecture about duende is when he discusses a dance contest, where an 80-year-old woman, despite being against lovely women and girls with liquid waists, merely by raising her arms, throwing back her head, and stamping her foot on the floor, she won. Her moribund duende sweeping the earth with its wings made of rusty knives. The judges chose her to win the competition due to her duende. Though the young dancers had perfected technique and youthful beauty, and they moved with grace and skill, their movements were surfaced, choreographed, lacking depth, that raw emotion, that connection to the primal that the old woman possessed. This makes me think of when you see someone playing the piano who has perfect form, but they sit with their back straight, no movement, no expression in their face, and they hit every key perfectly. Compare it to a pianist who is completely their whole body and mind and spirit infused with the music, and they move and dance along to the playing, and how much more powerful it is when you feel that they are possessed by what it is they are creating. That, I would argue, is one of the best ways to see and feel duende in action. Part 8. Duende and National Character. Although Lorca speaks to the national character of Spain, he does not believe it is exclusive to Spain. He says, every art and every country is capable of duende, angel and muse. And just as Germany owns to the muse, with a few exceptions, and Italy the perennial angel, Spain is, at all times, stirred by the duende, country of ancient music and dance, where the duende squeezes out those lemons of dawn, a country of death, a country open to death. But where is the spirit of duende in the United States? It's too often buried within the psyche that chooses not to face it. It's inside the culture of exteriorization. Neil Postman, author of Amusing Ourselves to Death, states that Americans no longer talk to each other, they entertain each other. They do not exchange ideas, they exchange images. They do not argue with propositions, they argue with good looks, celebrities, and commercials. What I think poetry can do best is that, although there's something amusing in it and there is absolutely pleasure inside of it, it also needs to express these emotional truths, whether that comes out via the duende or you categorize it differently. There's something unmistakable in Lorca's thesis that I think we can all recognize if we spend enough time exploring these darker forms of thought.
Now, when I think about England, I think about duende being suppressed, that we don't really explore it in the way that we should culturally, and that this keep calm and carry on mentality that we've had since the world wars is affecting our relationship to it.
While duende may be suppressed in mainstream culture, some artists do give rise to this mythological urgency. I think of how Alice Oswald's poems Falling Awake tussle with this darker energy that we have. Consider the Irish poet W.B. Yeats's poem The Second Coming, which is infused with this sense of the uncanny. Or in France with Baudelaire, who kicked about in the Parisian muck, looking at the melancholic spleen of life. So in England, the duende is often more subdued but still present. Either way, there are other contemporary poets, like the American Sharon Olds, who grapples with the darkness in a way that resonates with duende. Tracy K. Smith has a collection of poems called Duende Poems, in which there is a title poem contained within it where furious music is heavy in the throat. In the US, we're a country of young deaths, lacking in healthcare, one that sanitizes and rejects death as much as possible. And I feel similarly when I'm in England, and I see this poor relationship with death and duende that permeates much of the Western world. I think of Alan Watts when he speaks about how we all stand around the bed of the dying and go, "Oh no, poor you," rather than celebrating, "Congratulations, you're going to die. You don't have to do taxes anymore." I argue it's therefore up to poets and other artists to find what it is that needs to be squeezed, to bring our national character together and create art that stirs this darkness in the blood so that we can recognize that love is only possible against the background of this great darkness. Duende reminds us that life is precious precisely because it is fleeting, and that joy and sorrow are two sides of the same coin. It is this awareness of mortality that can fuel the artist's creative fire. So what are we to do? Part 9. Death as an ending. Lorca says that in every other country, death is an ending. It appears and they close the curtains. Not in Spain. In Spain, they open them. Many Spaniards live indoors till the day they die and are carried into the sun. A dead man in Spain is more alive when dead than anywhere else on earth. His profile cuts like the edge of a barber's razor. He goes on to explore that when the Muse sees death, she closes the door, then goes back to silence. When the angel sees death, he flies in slow circles and weaves the elegy of poets like Keats and Herrera. But the angel is horrified as he feels a spider, however tiny, on his tender, rosy foot. Keeping in line with how duende is different rather than precious, Lorca says, the duende, by contrast, won't appear if he can't see the possibility of death, if he doesn't know he can haunt death's house, if he's not certain to shake those branches we all carry that do not bring, can never bring, consolation. With idea, sound, gesture, The Duende delights in struggling freely with the creator on the edge of the pit. Angel and Muse flee with violin and compasses, and the Duende wounds. And in trying to heal that wound that never heals lies the strangeness, the inventiveness of a man's work. So the Duende thrives on this confrontation with mortality. It is in the face of death that the artist finds the urgency, the passion, the love to create. Part 10. What can a poet, writer, or artist learn from Duende? Lorca states that what the poet can learn from Duende is that the magic power of a poem consists in it always being filled with Duende, in its baptizing all who gaze at it with dark water, since with Duende it is easier to love, to understand, and be certain of being loved and being understood. And this struggle for expression and the communication of that expression in poetry sometimes acquires a fatal character. To be a poet worth their weight in the dark gold of Duende, first, the gaze of Duende must be met. This cannot be half measured, and it is not going to be without its risks. As Jung would say, psychic contents spilling out from the unconscious can absolutely overwhelm someone. So, some who commune with Duende may lose themselves in it, become obsessed, be swallowed by its black tides. It can lead to obsession, madness, and even death, as exemplified by Lorca's own tragic fate. The poet who seeks Duende must be prepared to confront these risks, to dance on the edge of the abyss, knowing that one misstep can lead to ruin. But those that can dance on the edge between art and death, and pull from beyond the threshold into the everyday world with the skill and deftness of a great artist, can write poems suffused with Duende, the fruits of authenticity pumping thicker on the stem before they are devoured. The poet who wrestles with this is not afraid to confront the dark and bring back something precious and transformative from the other side of it all. Lorca asks, "The Duende, where is the Duende?" And he cannot help but describe it metaphorically, imagistically, poetically, for he knows that it is the only way to get close to its essence. He says, "Through the empty archway, a wind of the spirit enters, blowing insistently over the heads of the dead, in search of new landscapes and unknown accents, a wind with the odour of a child's saliva, crushed grass, and Medusa's veil, announcing the endless baptism of freshly created things." So one must wrestle with their Duende, gaze into the face of darkness and see their own, and transcribe it effortlessly to help another find theirs. Doing so, you can find the freshness of a poem that plays its ancient song, converses with the primordial tongue of the gods, and gets closer to the origin of what we are and where we are going. Here's my poem to Lorca and to Duende. Lady of broken and bloodied song. Lorca rushes the room, singing up blood through his lips. Look here, shows me his hands, his tongue all splashed with rust. She took the blood from me, he sings. Falls to the sofa, eyes shot with marrow. Look, he sings, the moon, the stars, look. They're leaking bile. Coal red blood on the tree. His mouth garbled with sap. Drops burst down his jacket. She's laughing. He laughs. She's crying. He cries. She's singing her song in my throat. Blood of the air, blood of the moon, blood of the blackening sun, the trees, the grass, scalped of green. I feel them drinking, he sings. Their blood now pulsing root and leaf. Where is the morning? He sings. Gone, gone, gone. Lady of broken and bloodied song, tell us, what was it you sang to him? To keep up with all things Poetry Vessel, sign up to the mailing list below and watch that video. See you next time.